Podcasting is more than just talking. It's listening. BSing with Bob Schmidt.
It's the first ever BSing with Bob Schmidt podcast, and I'm proud to have my first guest be a good friend of mine, David Slane. He's an author, entrepreneur, boss man, friend, and tarpon fisherman. Dave Slane wrote the book Sales. It's that simple. Dave, let's start off with being a tarpon fisherman. How is being a fisherman similar to slaying it on the sales office?
Oh, it's all about the hunt, my friend. And, you know, the funny thing is you kind of just shocked me with that question. But there is a lot of similarity in sales and tarpon fishing because it's all about the hunt. You don't go out and just catch tarpon easily. You got to work really hard for it. And then once you finally do catch one, after you're worn out, the reward feels so good. So I think from a lot of ways, fishing for tarpon and sales are very similar. You know, work your butt off to get a sale, but once you do close something and you catch that tarpon and or get that business, man, the feeling's unlike any other.
Well, isn't that shows your competitive side, being a kind of a sports fisherman and a closer? Yeah,
you have to be competitive. You got to want to win. That's no doubt. It's not like in your face competition because so many people think that if you're competitive, you're mean or whatever. Not at all. It's the will to win, the want to be able to win and get that business is really a huge key because if you're just nonchalant, you won't do the right things to get the business. You have to have that passion. That's a really good point, Bob.
Dave Slane is my guest today on the show, and I brought up the fishing part just because I have known you for a long time, and I've gone fishing with you, and I know that you're good at doing it. You're good at reading the waters, and you're good at reading people. And you wrote a really cool book called Sales. It's that simple. Going from when you started off your career, I know that you studied to be in the radio, and I know that you studied to do what I'm doing, and you chose to take a different path. What made you choose that different path?
Well, I have to be 100% honest with you. When I say that I actually have a degree in communications with advertising and with concentrations in broadcasting, advertising, and public relations, that's true, but understand how that degree came about, and I have to be totally honest. I went to school to play basketball, and I wanted to graduate in 4 years. So my sophomore year, I'm like, how do I graduate in 4 years? They said, you can do that. I said, that's what I want to do.
The truth comes out.
Yeah, it just so happened that I really did enjoy being on the radio when I was on the radio. And I was a producer of television shows, recitals, things like that. I loved all that. I was a cameraman. I did color commenting for athletic events, all those things in school. I loved it. It was great, but I can't tell you that's what my dream was. I just wanted to graduate in 4 years, excuse me. But the key for me was when I graduated, I thought I was going to play basketball in Europe, but I hurt my knee, my ACL went out, and I just never recovered like a lot of you guys can today. So instead, I had to go out into the job market. So I went out, and my coach knew a few people, and then I answered a few ads. And I went on 5 interviews and got offered 5 jobs, which was pretty cool. Which was really cool. I mean, this is 1994. I'm showing I'm an old guy. And, I took the highest paying one, and they gave you a company car. So I thought that was really cool, which was sales. I didn't know what sales was. And that's actually what put me into sales. It wasn't because I went to school for it. It wasn't because it was something I was sought after. Well, that's the real story. So I wish I could tell you there was more to that, but that's how I got into the field of sales.
Now, when you were a kid, did you ever do any Cub Scout sales or any fundraising sales, things like that?
No way. I was so shy. I was afraid to talk to people.
You?
Yes. So shy, so unsure of myself that I would hid in the corner, and I was huge. I grew up huge and fast. I think I was something like shaving in 8th grade. It was ridiculous.
And now you're bald.
How big I was. 6 foot. I was 6'4" as a sophomore, and I think I was 6 foot in 8th grade.
Wow.
So I grew fast, and I was just shy, very unsure with myself. So no way would I do that.
Really? See, that to me, I don't know, because I've known you as a professional, and I know you as a friend. And so, I mean, I see multiple sides of Dave, but I don't see Dave being shy at all.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, in my natural state, because of that, I do have an introvert type personality, which I know, right, sounds weird, right? I take these personality tests, and I'm part of all these groups, or at least I have been part of all these groups with C-level positions, and I take these personality tests, and all these guys there's no way. It doesn't make sense, because, I am slightly, and like 51 introvert, and then 49 not, and I can't think of what the letters are for it at the moment. But everyone's shocked because I'm so blunt or able just to, to state and not afraid to go up to someone and say, hey, how are you doing? Or just talk about any conversation now.
Right.
But that was self-taught. That was not something that came natural.
Now, is that part of being a sales guy?
I think that how do I say that right, is I think I had to overcome it to be a sales guy.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I've asked that question to a lot of people, and I think doing things that put you outside the box, things that challenge you, I think a lot of people do well at that. And that goes back to the whole competitive spirit. That goes back to the hunt of the fish, It really does.
Absolutely.
It really
Never
does.
give up attitude. That's what whenever you're trophy hunting for fish, man, that's what it's all about. Same thing with the sale, is you never give up attitude.
Well, your book is called Sales, It's That Simple. Why that is a name?
The reason I chose that as a name was sales in itself is simple. It isn't that complex. And what I mean by that is you have a product or service and someone wants it. That's as simple as sales is. I mean, if you think about it, you walk into a grocery store and they sell things to you all the time. You walk out, but you don't know you've been sold, right? So sales is very simple, but what becomes complex is once you throw humans into it and our emotions. So our emotions lead us and tell us so many different things, and they're perceived most of the time. Like we're afraid someone's not going to like us because maybe we don't speak right or say the right thing. Maybe we get embarrassed, and since now we're embarrassed, our mind isn't open, so now we do screw up even more. Or say that something bad happens and you just shut up. I mean, all these things are really bad if you're in the field of sales. Actually, it's bad for any type of communication. But the emotions of what happens on both the buyer and the seller are the ones that can make it complex.
How do you work that out of yourself? Because emotions not only are with the buyer, but I think emotions sometimes with the seller is difficult too. Because if you go in for a multi-million-dollar deal or even a $1,000 deal, and that person is your friend, and then they say no. There's you know what I mean? You got the emotion that's in there that's not automatically built in. You're like, well,
lose. Right, Bob. That's a good point. And a lot of people think exactly like what you just said. But you don't want to lose your emotion. Emotion isn't a bad thing. It just makes things more complex. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. You imagine having an emotionless society? That'd be terrible. So you want the emotion. What you want to be able to do is control your emotion and making sure that you have enough self-confidence in yourself that you're getting it across. So if all of a sudden I'm talking to my friend Bob and I say, hey, Bob, this is my product or service, and you say no, I'm going to ask you why no. Can you help me so I know why you said no so I can learn how to do this different and or maybe clarify something for you? It's just asking questions to make sure everyone's on the same page. And after you're on the same page, if Bob doesn't want it, why do I want to sell it to him? Because he doesn't want it. He's not the fit. I move on. I mean, that's as simple as that is.
Is it different now, though? I mean, because that sounds like ethical selling right there. And you mentioned earlier that, that sales people sometimes don't have the best reputation. I think that maybe nowadays people have a different outlook to a salesperson now, perhaps, than they did 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
You think worse?
No, I think probably better. Well, when it comes to face-to-face sales, you get we all get these telemarketer calls on our phone. We all get the people calling from overseas with a local number, and those types of salespeople I don't think have a good reputation at all. But I think that sales has kind of changed now, so it's more of an ethical thing to sales than it was 30 years ago or 20 years ago, because I think that 20, 30 years ago we had the Herb Tarlick thought of a salesperson or the used car salesman.
That's a good point. Now, I think sales overall is ethical, right? That's all part of it. People are either unethical or ethical. And the person is who's going to determine whether or not they do things wrong or right. So no matter what you do, and I don't care if it's sales, accounting, I don't care if it's operations, whatever you do, you could have someone who's unethical or ethical. Sales is no different than that. Sales can have unethical people, and what dominated were the unethical people from years back in the used car lot that would actually lie in order to get a sale. Does that still exist today? Absolutely, because people exist today, and some people are unethical. That's no different. But I really believe you got that 70% of all people, maybe more, but that's kind of a generality are going to be really ethical about it. And I do think overall, sales has evolved into a much more complex way of selling up into the business world. Even though it's a simple way of looking at it, there's a lot more you have to do. Like, you can no longer just sell a product without understanding exactly how that product's going to work and how it's going to benefit. That's the type of things I mean.
Like, what about passion? I mean, I would think that you'd have to have passion for the product that you're selling to in order to be good, or maybe to be super successful at it.
Yeah, I don't call it necessarily passion, Bob. In my book, what I talk about is if you don't believe in it, don't sell it. And I think that's how I look at it, because if you believe in something, that passion's going to come through. It's like when I go and see a movie with someone, I'm like, this was the greatest movie, like Shawshank Redemption. How many times can I watch it on TV, for Christ's sake? It comes on, I sit down, I watch the darn thing. I mean, you go and you see Shawshank and you tell people that, you got passion for it. It's no different with any product or service you're going to sell. If you have belief in it, you're going to have passion, and that's going to come straight through.
Well, does your book, 8 Simple Principles that you have in the book, Sales It's That Simple, do you go through and kind of outline that whole piece?
Yeah, I do. So there's 8 simple principles throughout the book when you read that book, and I go into all 8 of them for you step by step by step.
So the first one I see here is to think positively. What about when you're having that craptastic day? Because I think every one of us has had those crappy days, and all of a sudden you're expected to be on when you're having bad luck.
Let's talk about positive thinking. It's one of the most misunderstood parts and sayings, because people think positive thinking just means, hey, you better be positive. When you have a death in the family, that sucks. And it's not going to say, hey, okay, yay, someone died. No, that sucks. Positive thinking is, no, this really sucks. I'm going to have a hard time with it, but I'm going to get through it, and I'm going to be stronger and move on. That's positive thinking. So a lot of people misunderstand what it means. You can't have a false reality. If your day sucks, you say in positive thinking, hey, my day is going bad, but I know if I keep going, it's going to turn around and things will get better for me. That's positive thinking. And I go into detail about that you don't want to be stuck in false realities, because if you're stuck in those, then you're like in a different dimension and you're not living in the real world.
Right. So going to that then, is it live in the moment then too when you're doing sales?
Yes and no. So most of sales is preparation. So you're ready to present to whoever your audience is. And then there's a section of sales that's in the moment. So you have to understand in the moment what your buyer's doing, why they're doing it, and how you interact with them. And if you look at your buyer more as a buddy and just change some of your words, you're going to do pretty well in sales. Instead of saying, dude, you got to check this out, you say, hey, Bob, I'd like you to look at this. And it's the same way, in the same mannerism like you would anybody else. So you do have a sense of in the moment, but a lot of it's done with preparation.
Is that where your defined strategy comes in then? That's the preparation part?
That is correct. And that's why defined strategy is so important as a principle is you have to know what you're trying to do when you get there. And if you don't understand what you're trying to do, how are they going to understand what you're trying to convince them of? So, and that's a big thing that a lot of people get wrong real fast.
Now, when you say convince them of, is that what you mean by the sales? You're either selling them a product or an idea or whatchamacallit?
Yeah, correct. So you convince them of what you're trying to do. And like, for instance, say you're selling some sort of cleaner. You convince them that your cleaner is going to do a better job. Mm-hmm. So then at that point, they determine whether they want to buy that cleaner or stay with someone else. But if you convince them, they probably want yours.
Because I've seen some of these infomercials on TV where They're not really selling the cleaner. They're selling an easier way to clean something. So they're selling, they're selling it a different way to make you think that you're getting a better product.
Yeah, there's all different types of ways to sell things. So all that is ease of use or not as much work. A lot of infomercial things are ease of use or not as much work. Same thing. It's no different than, hey, I'm going to go through an automatic car wash rather than wash the car myself. You got sold on, I don't want to wash the car myself. I'm going to go through the automatic car wash. It's no different than on the infomercials. It's all that ease of use, which is very common sales technique, all the time used, and people willingly buy through them. But infomercials are unique all by themselves. So much fun to one day get into those and dissect those.
We'll have to do another conversation on something like that. What about knowing your product? How do you get to just study your product and be a student of what it is that you're selling?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Just be a great user if it's a service or the product, and just make sure you understand what's happening so that when you talk to people and you talk about the features and the benefits of it, you can really relate to them. I mean, if you know your product can do something because you've used it and it works for you, that comes across so well. And or if it's something that is business to business, that you see how it's impacted other businesses in a positive way, that comes through. So you want to know your product and understand what's going on, because the buyers today are more sophisticated and understand and be able to ask more questions. So you have to be able to answer their questions.
Is that different B2C than B2B?
No, it's the same. Other than maybe the intensity level of how well the buyers are educated is maybe even higher in B2B. But even B2C now, all consumers are being way more educated via the internet and all those things that are available to them. So it's really hard to convince someone of something that's just untrue, or convince someone of something that you really don't have answers to if all of a sudden they Google it and they get the answer, but yet you didn't give it to them.
You brought up the elephant in the room with Google around. Is it hard to sell with the answers at the fingertip of the consumer when they can go and perhaps find it for 10% cheaper somewhere else?
Not if you follow my 8 principles, no, because you never get caught in anything because you already know your product and we're selling the truth and explaining how it works. And if a price point is an issue, that's always negotiable in the field of sales. So if you're selling something, price is negotiable, so you can work through it. Can price become an issue at some point? Absolutely. But getting into strategic pricing is an in-depth piece that we can definitely cover another time for if people want to get into advanced selling techniques for that.
Okay.
But you definitely need to understand pricing and negotiations for sure.
Now, your 4th principle is resolve. What do you mean by that?
So a lot of times what happens is you do all this work and you're ready and have a defined strategy and you understand your product, and you call on maybe 2 or 3 accounts and they don't go well. So if you have a positive attitude, you're going to go make another call, but the resolve is, does your defined strategy work? And are you going to give up on your defined strategy too quick because it's 0 for 2? So resolve is 2 things. Resolve is to believe in your positive attitude. It's the resolve to make sure that if you go through the work and you understand your product based upon your defined strategy of how you're going to sell it, the resolve allows you to keep pushing through no matter what's in front of you. And that's what resolve means.
Is that the biggest roadblock that the typical salesperson has?
Yeah, it is. And it's for many reasons. A lot of times it comes back to what I was saying is the human emotion again. So something happens and they just get petrified by whatever happens. You start to sweat, you have a little panic attack because you can't believe it was embarrassing. And a lot of times that by itself just makes people not want to go forward or not want to try something again. And the mindset has to be that you're learning. The first time I ever was on ice skates was kind of scary. And I fell a lot. And it's no different when you do anything. You're going to fall, and it's going to hurt a little bit until you finally get used to doing it. So sales is no different than anything else. You got to go through that and have the resolve to keep pushing forward.
What was your biggest failure, Dave?
There's so many failures. See, the thing about that is I want to talk in general. I'll answer that question for sure. But I had a long talk with a coach of mine that was developing me. And he's like, what's your biggest failure? And I said, I don't fail. He's like, you've never failed in your life. I go, that's not true at all. I fail all the time. He's like, but you just told me you don't fail. I said, I don't. And he goes, I'm confused. I don't understand what you're saying. And I looked right at him and I said, I only fail temporarily because I keep going, and I'm going to succeed at what I want to do. Sometimes it just takes years, and sometimes it takes months, and sometimes it takes days. So I look at that as there's a bunch of failures mixed in there. But my attitude always is that you just make yourself right upon any failure, and it's not a permanent failure. That's how I look at life in general, as we always screw up or do something that we didn't like, but it's never permanent. It is something that we can do to right it and or keep going and keep moving forward. Me in the field of sales, I would say the scariest thing that ever happened to me was I just got hired as a VP of sales at one company, and a year into it, we're trying to grow this company fast, and a year into it, I lose $8 million.
Ugh.
I had to go to the owner and go, well, I lost $8 million with the business. And he said to me, he's like, well, how are we going to handle this? And I said, well, what we're going to do is put together a plan and figure out how to get that $8 million back. And he said, really? I said, yes. And believe it or not, because I never gave up on it, we actually sold $11 million that year. So we actually grew by $3 million, even with an $8 million loss.
That having the tail between your legs and going to your boss and saying that, I couldn't even imagine.
Just remember though, that message is we all fail and all things are terrible that happen in the moment. Emotionally, you're worried. I was, but if you keep pushing forward and looking at, all right, how do I deal with this? You will succeed through the end, and that's what I mean about not permanently failing. When I say I don't fail, I don't permanently fail. I just look at it as we keep trying in order to make sure we win. And I like to quote Yoda all the time when I train. Do or do not. There is no try.
Have the ability to change, Dave. It sounds like you've had that ability in the past with your failures that ended up being successes.
Absolutely. So the ability to change as a principle really is impacted by a lot of different parts. So I want to make sure that, because it's a little convoluted when you go through it, so this is a really interesting part of how all the principles play together. And when you go through the principles, they're written in a specific order on purpose. So the ability to change is here, because this is the area at this point when you're learning how to sell that you have to be able to change yourself, your strategic plan, your understanding of the product, and you have to be self-aware enough, which comes through positive thinking, that you're able to do that. So the ability to change is across everything above it. How can you make sure that if you need to, you will change in order for you to win? Because failure is only temporary.
That would be a hard thing, I think, to teach a new salesperson, that failure is only temporary.
It takes the longest amount of time. But if you understand the first principles that are there before the ability to change, you will understand that where you should change them. But is it the most difficult one to get people to understand? Absolutely. I shouldn't say that. The most difficult one's the last one. But is it the second to most difficult one? Absolutely.
You know, you mentioned earlier that that you wanted to grow your company fast. Was that the reason you were brought in, is for fast growth?
Yes, it was. So basically, we wanted to more than double the company within 5 years. So we had to do a lot of work in order to do that, and we were able to even do more than that. So it's been a lot of fun.
Very cool. So, all right. So execute then. So you have a plan. You've got your PowerPoint presentation done. You've got a plan of what you want to do. You know your product really well. You've got a positive attitude. You're ready to change if you need to. Now, how do we execute that, the process that we've gone through?
You know, the funny thing that you go, this is the simplest one. And in the book, I don't even think there's more than 4 or 5 pages, if I remember right. And execute is just that. You just do it. So all the work you did and we'll call it blood, sweat, and tears just because it sounds better, that you go through and did, is now you just go and do it, actually do the things. You're going to pick up that phone. You're going to talk to that person. You're going to go and research that part. You actually do all these things that you've been thinking about. You actually put the effort forward. That's as simple as execute is. That's it. You just don't say it or write it. You do it.
I would guess that's one of the harder things for people to do, though, because people are BSers. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll call you back.
It's the easiest one to manage, Bob. That's the good news, because it's written, there's dates, and you talk to them. So believe it or not, from a managerial standpoint and from that salesperson, you can teach that really quick. And most people get that. Now, there's failures in there that you have to figure out how to overcome because they didn't go as well as they want, but they're still executing. So it's one of the easier ones to teach because it's so black and white. This is what I said I would do, and you put it on a piece of paper with a plan, and this is the date I said it would be done by.
The number 7 rule is ask, and I do a lot of asking just of different things. Is there certain things that you need to ask when it comes to closing something, or is it just simple as asking for the sale?
Yeah, it's believe it or not, it's as simple as asking for the sale. So ask now. You talked about how difficult the last two, you would think would be. This is the most difficult one for people to do, and I don't understand why to this day. But this is something people really struggle with. You've done all this great work, but they're afraid to ask for the sale. And if someone says no, they're afraid to ask, why are you saying no?
You know why?
What don't you like about it? I'm sorry?
I'll tell you the reason why. Because your whole life, when you're a kid, your parents tell you don't talk to strangers. Your parents tell you don't ask people for something. So all of a sudden, you're asking a stranger for money or for a sale, and I think that's probably part of the psychology of the whole thing, is that you've been told your whole life not to do this, and then all of a sudden you're doing it, and somebody says no, so you're like, okay, turn around and walk away.
Oh, understood. I understand that there is a human emotion in public speaking, that being the most feared thing there is on earth. And I understand all that, and that's what we talked way in the beginning of this podcast about, is that emotion makes it more complex. But to give you an example, it's like training for a marathon and never running it. You did all this work so that you could win, and you don't ask for the question. They're talking to you for a reason. If they're still engaged with you, you actually have done a good job that you can actually start asking them questions, and they want to answer the questions. So although there's the emotional part that gets in your way, as you rightly pointed out, because of however your upbringing was or what people have told you, or the reputation of salespeople, whatever that is coming into your head is all valid and real. But as long as you keep thinking through the process and the steps, that stuff kind of goes away, because you're kind of like, all right, I'm going to run this marathon if I'm going to do all that months and months of training. And so you just have to figure out, is asking for the business as simple as, would you want to get started, or is this something you want to buy? Simple questions like that. You can also do a soft close of saying, hey, how about we get started with this? Is that okay with you? There's just simple ways of asking questions. And if they say no, asking, just so I understand, why are you saying no? What don't you like?
Does that turn into a yes, though? I mean, if somebody's like, if you say no, and then you follow it up with, well, why are you saying no? And then they give you an answer, and then you say, oh, I must not have properly told you about this. And then, I mean, does that turn into a yes ever?
A lot of those turn into yeses. I would say in more cases they turn into yeses than nos. And the good news is, if you ask questions, you may find out that's a bad product or service for them and don't sell it to them. And often, but I'd say more times than not, you find out that they misunderstood something you were saying. And because they misunderstood it, that they said no. And now that they understand it, they're either thinking about it, it's not a dead sale, or they have said yes. And sometimes it takes 5 questions deep before you ever can get to what the real answer is. But you got to be asking questions. And you have to be silent enough to listen to the answers.
What's the best question to ask?
Would you like to buy my product?
But no, I do not.
I would like to know why you do not want to buy it. Would you mind telling me?
So just basically, you just want to peel away the onion just so you can get to the middle.
Correct. Yeah, so either you get to that it is the wrong product or service, or now they understand exactly what your intent was. As long as they understand what your intent was, they can choose yes or no.
Now, is this for everything, Dave, from selling a pen to a car, to a house, to a building?
The answer is yes, but I'm sure there's exceptions out there in some places, but I'm just going to say yes, because everything's a big word. Mm-hmm. Worst case scenario would be almost everything.
I was just wondering if it was different depending on if it's a $5 product or a $1,000 product or a $1 million product.
No, the principles are still the same. Now you may have different ways of looking at it, like commodity, non-commodity. That gets into more complex selling. Uh-huh. Say you're selling a really expensive service that's solving a problem. That's a little bit different selling, but those principles remain the same.
Now, your final, the number 8 in the sales, it's that simple lesson is understanding the differential theory. What does driving a car have to do with selling?
That's funny. Well, the funny thing is when you bring that up, the differential theory is such a made-up term by me. I was just sitting and I was thinking about what in the world do I call this, and I didn't know what to call it, and I just made up that term. I don't even know if it's a real term. In fact, I don't think it is. I made it up. I made it up out of the blue sky. And what that really means is I wanted to come up with a term that allowed people to understand what's the difference between good and great in sales. And you can go through all 7 principles and be good, but what's going to make you great? The 8th one's what makes you great, and it's the most important one that only can be effective once you understand the first 7 well. This one is very difficult to teach, and the reason why is we have our own opinions on things, and our brain wants to keep leading that way. So if I'm leading in how I think things should work, and that's how I sell something, it's only people who are like-minded like me are going to relate to it. That could be 10%. I could be lucky. That could be 30%. Instead, if you're selling to someone, you want to do the converse to that and understand how they think. Why are they interested? What makes them think that it is a good idea? It's not about what you think. It's about what they think. And I think that's the key that people don't understand how to apply, because your own thoughts come back and dominate. That's the differential theory.
What are the steps that a person needs to take to go from being good to being great?
Understanding the differential theory. That's it. Huh. Learning how to apply that into your everyday life. If you do that, the rest of the 7 steps are going to be perfectly done, and they will understand what you're trying to do.
We've gone through the 8 simple steps. In sales, it's that simple. I want to kind of ring it back to where we started, because I know that you're a fisherman. I know that you tarpon fish. How is tarpon fishing and closing that big deal then? How are they similar?
You know, when you look at it, as we began the program, we talked about that hunt and that hard work, and that you want to be able to get that payoff. And that payoff either being the sale on the selling side or the catching that tarpon on the hunt side. And you know, when you're done and you do your homework and you went and scouted where these fish are and you understand where they're hitting and you've done all the work so that gives you the best chance to succeed, and you land that tarpon, there's no feeling like it. I mean, you're super excited. You're shaking. It's just so much fun. It's no different than following my principles. You do all 8. That's the hard work. That's knowing the location, knowing what the tarpon want to eat. That's the hard work. And then finally, when that hard work starts paying off, you'll find that your ability to get people to understand what you're selling skyrockets. And after that, those sales, and the sales start happening at a level that's never happened to you before, you start to shake, because it's really exciting.
That sounds awesome. I'm excited to get started on going through these 8. So let me ask you this. Do you do all 8 of them in a row?
I recommend through there that you do one by one.
Okay.
So you learn each step and then move on to the next one, and then move on to the next one, and then move on to the next one, and then eventually, in order, you will have all of them completed. I do not recommend trying to learn more than one at one time.
Well, because I know that it's a pretty quick read of a book. How long is the process to get through these 8?
Depending upon the person and how well they catch on, it could be anywhere from 3 months to 5 years.
3 months to 5 years?
Yes. The differential theory people can be stuck on for a long time.
Yeah, that's actually the one. We're going to have another conversation about that one a little bit later, I think. The book is called Sales, It's That Simple. Dave Slane, the author. Dave's website is daveslane.com. You can find information about Dave there. You can also find information about his LinkedIn and how to purchase the book. Thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it.
The BSing with Bob Schmidt podcast is brought to you by Orange Computer. Find them online at orangecomputerlax.com.
This has been another podcastforhire.com production.